So when I see a patient in clinic, often I'm a geneticist, and I have to go through and explain some of the basics of genetics. We all have 46 chromosomes. We all probably remember this from way back, maybe in high school. We know now that we have about 20,000, 21,000 genes, basically, that are expressed that actually produce proteins. These proteins have some sort of function. We know the function of about 4,500 of those proteins specifically. We know what they do as best as we possibly can know it. And we have diseases for about 3,500 of those genes. So I'm explaining this to somebody in clinic. We're trying to find if they have a genetic disorder. We know what about 3,500 diseases are. We got 20,000 genes. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Every gene is supposed to make a protein. That protein should have a function. In theory, that function, if it's disrupted, causes a disease. Sometimes, or sometimes not. Okay, this one. So this is my chromosomes, in case you ever want to, you're curious. That's what your chromosomes look like, right? We've all seen these pictures from back in high school or in textbooks, right? Little black and white stripes, and our genes are in that. So that's me at the molecular level. And so sometimes in order to determine what kind of disease this person has, we do DNA sequencing. So we look at one of those particular genes. So in this case, we actually focus on one of those 4,500 genes where we know what they kind of do. We may sequence just that one gene, we may sequence a dozen or 100 or all 4,500. And we look at the DNA sequence. So if you look at the top line there, that's just a normal sequence that I made up. It's not a particular gene. And so we look for errors in that DNA sequence. So if you can see, it doesn't show up as well in the red, but right here in the middle, that C has been changed to a T. That one little change, that one little molecule in that cell may cause that cell not to work right. It causes that cell, that protein that's expressed and that function it's supposed to have, not to happen the way it's supposed to. Cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, diseases you may have heard of, phenylketonuria maybe, PKU. That one change causes that disease. In cancer, actually, some cancers, one mutation causes that disease. And sometimes those changes are just single changes like that, or sometimes they're larger deletions. There's a couple bases missing, or sometimes it's 20 or 30 or 1,000 bases that are missing or changed or added to. There's some sort of change there that happens. And that's what sequencing does. It kind of tells us a little bit about, well, hopefully we can figure out what's going on. So we read the gene to discover its function. From that, we can go, well, based on this, we can predict what your disease is going to be. We compare that sequence to what we call a normal reference sequence. Now, that's something we've developed over the past 15 years, not 15,000 years. Over the past 15 years, we've been able to read people's DNA, and there's databases out there now building libraries of hundreds and thousands of people. And we use kind of like, here's what's normal there that we're finding in everybody's DNA sequence. And we look for changes in the DNA that cause a disruption in how that DNA is then read and made into a protein. Because if that protein doesn't work right, in theory, that leads to the cell not working right, not working up to the way it's supposed to, or the cell dying. And if the cell dies, if that's happening in every cell of your body, that can cause disease or cause death. Sometimes we find a DNA change that we just don't know what to do with. It's not something we've seen before. These are the bane of every geneticist across the planet right now, because our technology just allows us to look for things that we've just never seen before. We go, well, maybe this looks like a mutation. We go through the textbooks. Oh yeah, it's been seen before. Boom, disease, we're good. That's a nice, clean answer. We love it when we can do that for families and for patients. Sometimes we get a DNA sequence back and we're like, well, this is normal. You're totally normal. We can't find it in this DNA sequence that we just did. There's not a mutation. So maybe it's a non-genetic disorder. It's an autoimmune disorder or something like that. What's causing autoimmune disorder is another level of genetics we haven't gotten to. That's that other 15,000 genes. But sometimes we have to go, well, what does this variant mean? So I go, well, it's in the patient, in the child I'm looking at. Is it in the mom or the dad? The dad has symptoms of disease or not, or some sort of variation on the thread. We go, well, maybe it's significant, or no, it's not. This should be lethal. This should cause severe problems. That mom is healthy. It wasn't inherited. We look for other mutations nearby in that protein. So we go back to the previous sequence. if you go look for something nearby and somewhere in that neighborhood, we'll see if we can find out. That can give us some, so try to deduce this a little bit. We'll check with similar genes. Not every gene is totally unique. Some of them are almost identical to others. They're only slightly changed over time. So we look for similar genes with similar mutations and kind of extrapolate, well, this should cause, it's in the same area that should cause this particular function for moving calcium in and out of the cells, or for being a neurotransmitter disorder or a metabolic problem. We'll go comb through the medical literature and comb through the databases, and I'll spend hours doing this on some patients, trying to find that answer. We'll go and look at the DNA sequence in mice and in snakes and in elephants, going, well, does it cause those animals not to, do they have diseases in those animals we can find? That same gene works in that same animal. Maybe it causes disease in dogs, and we actually have models for that, and drug companies use those animals to create new drugs so we can cure that disease. And we do computer models. We sit down, and this is big data nowadays. This is a fascinating area of science and math and medicine all kind of blending together with genetics. And they extrapolate based on where that mutation is in that protein. Does it change that protein just enough that it should cause disease, or should cause that protein not to work at 100%? Maybe that protein is going to work at 20%, or it's going to work at 5%, or it's going to work at 90%. 90%, probably not going to cause a problem. 10%, maybe, maybe not. 5%, we're getting into the realm of where it probably is going to cause significant problems. So we kind of model this out a little bit. So how do we deal with this? We analyze, we wait, we hope. Well, we'll come back in a year, maybe we'll have it figured out by then. Maybe somebody else will discover this somewhere else on the planet. That's why, I spend all day in front of the computer sometimes digging up these things. Sometimes, though, one of my nurses came up with a term. It's an OGK. Only God knows. Nurse came up with this about 5 years ago, and I was like, that kind of actually works at a different level, doesn't it? Life has variance as well. Sometimes there are things that seem kind of random in our lives, and they're part of something. Maybe they cause disease, maybe they don't cause disease. A few years ago, I gave a sermon on chaos. I don't know if you remember that. Chaos and confusion. There's differences between chaos and confusion. All right, chaos is, there's an order to this chaos. Confusion, if you go into the Hebrew, you go how confusion is used throughout the Bible. Confusion is dishonor, shame, reproach, emptiness, waste. It's just emptiness. It's void. There's total randomness. It's disorder without any type of function. And when you look at chaos as a theory, right, there's a pattern that often comes out as a chaos theory. It's a mathematical concept that if you took any one of these particular lines and drew it, it just seems kind of random on paper. But if you keep doing that according to this formula, eventually you see there's a pattern, and it's not just totally random. Maybe there's something. Yep, sorry, I had a different order than I had up here. Made a last minute change, apparently. There's a pattern to this chaos. There's something that's, maybe there's a designer that's within it a little bit. There's some sort of order to that chaos. It's not just totally random. And these things happen for maybe a larger scheme that we can't make out by just looking at one cycle of this loop. Sometimes we have to have faith to kind of look at what that chaos might show us. God allows these variants to occur in our life. He creates changes in our life. He creates variants in our life. Sometimes we know what these variants mean. Maybe we figure them right away. It's kind of clear and obvious. Sometimes we don't figure out what they mean, right? Some changes that occur in our life are good. Maybe not good that moment, but a year from now or 2 years from now, they're good, right? Some are bad, right? We go through things, we just don't know why this is happening. We know that, or some obvious bad result. There's a car accident that happens, right? Bad things happen. And sometimes those things are unknown. Well, why does God allow change? Why does he allow these things to happen? Well, sometimes this occurs because there's a design. He told you there's a blessing and a curse. He designed it that way. Go to Deuteronomy 30 and verse 19. I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Go back and read that chapter. I kind of wanted to, but I don't have enough time. There's a design to whatever that change is. Maybe that change that happened was just a random thing that happened, right? Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11. Time and chance happen to all. Things seem to occur by chance. That's that randomness that pops up in life. But we have to have faith to see beyond that randomness sometimes. And the third way that change can occur is maybe by our own fault. We manipulate the events to get them to what our desired outcomes are. We want our will to be done. I don't know, if somebody else's will is more important. God works according to a plan. Oop, wrong button. There we go. God works according to a plan. If you go back and read Ecclesiastes. Go back and read Exodus 25 and verse 8. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them according to all that I show you. That is a pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings. So is how you should make it. All according to his plan. You're not allowed to add to it. You're not allowed to take away from it. This was God's plan for his tabernacle, for his temple. You didn't change that, right? You go in the next few verses, if you did change it, it can cause problems. Very specific. Man tried to create another tower, if you remember back the previous book, right? In Genesis 6, Tower of Babel, man was doing what was right in his own eyes. So sometimes there's a plan there, and maybe we don't know what that plan is. Our plan is to just build the golden altar. Maybe our plan is just to hang the curtains around whatever part of the tabernacle or the temple it was. But we're human. We only see randomness. From our point of view, we see this, we see that, we see the other thing. We see confusion sometimes. We see disarray. But God has a higher viewpoint. He knows better. His perspective is not ours, right? He sees the beginning for the end. He sees the pattern of the butterfly there in that chaos picture I showed you a second ago. He expects you to learn to see that as well. See those things that are not yet fully seen. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 1, we know this, right? To everything there is a season, for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, and a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. Building, weeping, laughing, stones, embracing, speak, silence, sow. Those words don't make sense when I just shout them out, do they? There's an order to them. And if you change that order, if you change that order, that sentence I just gave you, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to, you can change, if you change those, you take out words, they don't mean the same thing, right? That time, you screw up the sentence, you screw up the phrase, the poetry of and the lesson of those verses. If you delete something that's supposed to be there, that's a mutation. If you add something to it that's not supposed to be there, that's a mutation. You can spell gain a couple different ways probably. So it's maybe a variant, but it's not going to change the meaning of it. We have to have faith in the variance. We have to have faith in the unseen. We have to have faith and know that this isn't just a random process. There's a plan to these events. And there's a design that's present there. There's a design to this whole plan. In the end, we're heading towards perfection. I think Rod kind of talked a little bit about perfection there and kind of having that God's mindset. but perfection, that his entire earth is going to be made perfect, right? That his entire creation. He created, and we've heard the sermons, and Mr. Hawley's given this a couple times, right? About space and where the earth is located in space and in time. This planet is in here, in this spot around this sun for a reason. This planet has these conditions on it for these reasons, right? That's mathematically irrefutable that this happened just randomly. You can't change that. Mankind is on this planet for a reason. Mankind was put in here. He created us to look like we do, to move about like we do, to have the abilities, the thoughts, the actions that we have. And he created your genetics to support all that. He put your DNA sequence in every one of your cells. Each of those DNA strands, if you span on each one of your cells, is 6 feet long. And you got 100 million different cells in your body. It's a lot of DNA stretched out, right? We have to have perseverance. We have to build faith in what is unseen. If we lack the faith to see where those changes are happening, if we're agnostic to what is going on, it's hard when you got to do the two-screen thing, sorry. If you're agnostic to it, if you can't see what is happening, then that's just random godlessness, right? You have no God other than just random chance. Maybe God's not in your life like it should be, and you're kind of facing that randomness a little bit more than maybe you should be. This is another thing that comes from chaos theory. It's kind of neat. It's called the Mandelbrot set. I don't know if anybody you've ever Googled these things. Type this in tonight in Google or on your phones after church or something, whenever you want to do it, but not right now. And you can see how it zooms in. If you zoom out on any particular spot, it just blows up the detail of what's there, and that never ends. It's an endless image, basically. It's an endless fractal pattern that keeps going in, and it keeps reproducing the same pattern again. And I sat and stared at one a couple nights ago, and I was doing it, and it went on for like 5 minutes, and it's just like, wow. I mean, it just doesn't stop. Yeah, there's a term for it. It's like the God formula or something like that, because it just never ends. And this infinite complexity that just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes beyond what you can imagine. I think the image I was went through like over 1,000 different levels of blowing it up and detailing it on each spot. And just like, when's it going to end? It never does. Not only that, in Romans 8 and verse 23, but we also have who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body, that perfection. For we were saved in this hope, and the hope that is not seen is not hope. But why does one still hope for what he sees? If we hope for what we not see, and we eagerly wait for it with perseverance, likewise the Spirit also helps in our weakness. For we do not know that we should pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know all things work together for good for those who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. It's a little bit different when you kind of think about it in these terms, isn't it? He's searching us. He's making intercession. We know all these things work for good. Perseverance in the face of what seem to be random challenges, random variants that occur in our life. Again, Mr. Holiday did a fantastic sermon on this a few months ago, if we all remember the perseverance sermon. What seems to be just random challenges, random things that are occurring, that is God changing you. That is God building your character, one variant at a time, making you something that you're not today, that you weren't a year ago, that you weren't 10 years ago, that you're not going to be today what you all will be in 10 years or 5 years or 20 or 50 years. He's going to make you stronger, whether you want to be stronger or not, right? He's promised us that. Maybe you will be pressed beyond what you're capable of handling. Maybe that variant will be a mutation. Maybe that variant will cause some sort of disease in your life, physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially. Maybe there's something there. But we know his promise that he's not going to tempt us beyond, he won't tempt us beyond what we're able with sin, because we can always get past sin, can we not? We have our Savior, his promise. That's what we just really focused in on here the past couple weeks. We have to see the bigger picture in that. We have to see the intelligent design, if you want to look at it for that in those terms. We have to see the design in these things, that Mandelbrot set. It just goes and goes. And there's a pattern there. It's always there. There's a beauty in it. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And let the patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives all liberally and without reproach, and will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Patience, perseverance. You have to let faith work to continue. We have to endure. This is our maturing of our mindset, becoming mature spiritual Christians, right? Putting away the childish things. We have to see the plan of God, how he's orchestrating in our lives. Now, some of you may think variants change over time. These changes in DNA over time have led to something. Our changes in our spiritual DNA have led to something. There's a theory out there that's pretty popular in this world. Anybody know where I'm going? It's okay to shout it out. Evolutionary process, isn't it? Evolution is basically change over time. These variants occurred over time, little things that changed and built things up. They changed things over time. They led to long-term change. Now, if you remove God from the mix, you're an atheist, you're an agnostic. Okay, you don't have that bigger picture, do you? That's neo-Darwinianism. That's the big thing that's prevalent in the world. But they're atheists. Even those who aren't atheists may be atheists if they don't really truly believe in the one God and what he's doing. But if you keep God in the mix and you look at how God works in your lives, in our lives, in my life, I've seen it. That's theistic evolution. Or some people will term intelligent design. We could get into the nuances of that maybe another time in more of a technical forum. But it's God designing that process. It's God changing things over time. I'm not going to get into the chronology of all this, but the process is something there. It's a theory that man is really bought into because they're like, it's got to be true. It's got to be true. Well, maybe there are elements of truth they've twisted and they've consorted. But maybe there's something there that we need to think about. Evolution and faith. You never thought you'd see those words on the screen. Evolution is a series of changes. Look at the life of Job. Look at the life of Paul, Elisha, Joseph, David, John the Baptist. Little changes you see in their stories, right? It led to where they're. Abraham's a fantastic story, right? God kept working with him. He's a man of faith. He worked with him. I mean, we could spend another hour talking about Abraham's life. And even in the end, he still had to go through the ultimate sacrifice, right? He had to get up there and get ready to sacrifice his son. He had the sword, the knife over his son before God stopped him. That was a mutation in Abraham's life, if you want to put it in those terms. He proved himself. He was a different man after that moment, I can guarantee you, than he was when God started with him in Babylon as a young boy and a young man leaving the Babylon. God's changing your spiritual DNA. He works with your emotional DNA. He works with your intellectual DNA, your social DNA, however you want to look at that. He's working with you, changing you. He's evolving you. I don't want to be controversial about and put that, don't think of it in atheistic terms. You are changing, are you not? We're all going to be new creatures in the end time. Variants build faith. These may be lethal. They may create disease, maybe create a cancer, if you will. These variants may be beneficial. God will clearly give you something and make you stronger and more powerful than you were before. And there are these variants of unknown significance. What do you do with those? I sat down with a family 2-3 weeks ago. I had one of these variants. I didn't know what to do. I had been working with this girl for 6 years trying to figure out what she had. We struggled and she had, well, I won't get into the details, but years, 6 years. Finally, I did one of these exomes. It was 4,500 genes, sequenced the whole thing. We're like, we're just going to do it. I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. I've done it before in other patients, haven't found a stone cold thing. She came back with a variant. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense with that particular disease. I don't really understand why that would fit. So I'm like, okay, and kind of dug through the literature. Well, there's one paper from like 4 years ago that came out. I'm like, well, maybe that fits a little bit. This disorder didn't usually have learning disabilities with it, but my patient did, and she had episodes of rage and problems. And so I sat down, well, I guess we could maybe kind of stretch it in there and kind of make it fit. Sat down with the family, and they came in and drove over from Eastern Washington and went through, and well, mom has this variant too, so mom's pretty healthy as far as I know. She told me she had a little problems here and there, some headaches here and there, but that's about it. Well, I sat down with her, and mom's like, well, yeah, I get headaches, but my face just goes totally numb, and it droops. Oh, that's hemiplegic migraine. That's the other disease that this mutation or this gene can cause. She never told me that in the 6 years. So that variant was a mutation, and it caused disease in mom and in her daughter. And then her teenager kids piped up, well, I get headaches too, and I get kind of weak, and I kind of do some of this, but I was just like, just stress. And well, maybe not. And so we're going to test them all now and see if that's what's going on. And there's a treatment for it. That was the beauty of it. I can put her on treatment I never had before. It's like, okay, well, let's going to see what happens. So that's 3 weeks ago. I'm going to hope to hear back from her in a few weeks, and we'll see where it goes. But you have to persevere. You have to learn and try to dig in. You have to kind of look at those things. You have to build your faith in the process. You have to build your faith in these variants. They're actually going to mean something in the end. God doesn't often just snap his fingers and poof, everything's changed, right? That's going to happen in the twinkling of an eye, yes. But where has that happened radically in your life where you've totally been, there are instances where things will be major mutations, major changes where we have to change right away. But he creates those situations, but often he changes you slowly over time in ways you don't know because he's teaching you a deeper lesson, something way beyond what you can think of today and the results that you want tomorrow, because he's got a result 10 years from now for you, doesn't he? God's will is what changes us. It makes us grow, adapt, and evolve. These variants occur. We have to learn from these. We have to build our faith. For God is creating a new creature in each of us, perfectly designed, perfectly evolved, to fit the exact spot he wants us to be in today, tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now. He uses those variants genetically to make us all unique, gives us different hair color, gives us the shapes of our nose. That's all those 15,000 genes we can't touch yet. And that's still only 2% of your DNA. You got another 98% of your DNA that we haven't a clue yet. It's left over from when we were apes, probably. But it's something there. God kept it there for a reason. We're going to figure out what all that means someday. Each of this is making us unique to fit the whole greater. I think Dr. Pacelli said something last week about each of us is more than just a part. We're part of a whole, and the whole is nothing without its parts, right? We have to walk in faith. We have to live by faith, and we have to learn from our variants.